All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming to join us tonight. My name is Billy Romaine, and I'm the manager of the Office of Energy and Sustainable Development. Um, we're a division in the planning department, City of Berkeley, and we're thrilled that so many people are joining us tonight and interested in Berkeley's building electrification strategy efforts. So before we begin, I first want to thank the Ecology Center for hosting us on Zoom, and for the Ecology Center staff, Andrea Tinio, who's providing tech support behind the scenes, and a big thank you to Rebecca Milliken from our office who helped organize this meeting, and members of the Berkeley Climate Action Coalition Working Group and the Sierra Club who volunteered to present and serve as electrification ambassadors, helping to answer questions in our chat and lead our breakout activities. You'll get to meet them later. And I also want to give a big shout out and recognize Danae Shorter with the Ecology Center, who co-convenes the Berkeley Climate Action Coalition, and Katie Van Dyke, who's the project manager from our office of this project and doing a wonderful job. So thanks to all of you. So as you may be aware, Berkeley has a goal of becoming fossil fuel free as quickly as possible. And this strategy is a critical piece of advancing that goal. So the scope of the project was to evaluate how quickly Berkeley's existing buildings could go all electric, and sort of how much it would cost, about how long it would take, and really to help us get an understanding of what short-term strategies we should be doing right now to help us meet this long-term goal of electrifying all of Berkeley's buildings at a community scale. So it was really an opportunity to look at this universal target of a community-wide electrification, and then looking at specifically what policies will be needed in that transition in a way that maximizes benefits to the community and promotes equity. The team conducted a building stock analysis to better understand what Berkeley buildings look like, what their vintages are, what kind of conditions they're in. Then we conducted some cost modeling to determine what it would cost in today's costs. We believe some of those costs are going to go down, other costs may go up. So we know what it would cost today, and that helps us with our decisions of what we do right now. And then we looked at the community. We mapped out community demographics, and we talked to the community. We talked to many of you with a focus on equity and inclusion, specifically with communities that are hit first and worst by the impacts of climate change. So the team will walk you through this in more detail. And before we begin, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping to just let you know the webinar is being recorded if you have any issues. And the slides, the recording, and the resources will all be shared after the event. So many of you have become Zoom experts this year. So this just a quick refresher, because we're doing this as a webinar mode. So please keep yourself muted until the breakout groups, and then you'll have lots of opportunity to talk and engage, sharing the space with others. You can rename yourself in your tile by going to the video settings. And then you can put your pronouns in also. And please enter your questions and comments in the chat function. And there are many different ways to view the presentations and the speaker. So you can go to the top right corner and make adjustments to maximize your viewing of that. And lastly, you can adjust the side of the slides too, so that you can see what you need to on the screen. So we'll start with a quick poll to see who's joining us this evening. So Andrea, do you want to launch our first poll? There are 4 questions. So scroll down to reply to all of them and submit your answer. So the first poll number 1 is, who is here? So I see answers, responses are coming in. Good for everybody. You're completing your poll. Oops, I just lost. So it looks like we have majority Berkeley residents, but some people not from Berkeley. majority non-property owners, got a lot of renters in Berkeley. Let's see, a majority of people living in single family homes. Oh, and then a majority of people owning their own homes. So sorry, it's, so we do have some property owners, managers, but majority not. So let's see, let's finish, make sure everyone's able to take the poll, look at the polling results. So let's see, I'm just looking. So a lot of people have single family homes, about 71% in single family homes or duplexes, which is more than the average in Berkeley. Berkeley's split about half and half renters, half property owners. So that's interesting. And that explains why in question number 4, most people own their own home since most people are living in single family homes. Oh, I see somebody says you're not seeing the results. So do I need to do something to share them, or can somebody share them? Thank you for putting that in the chat. So can everybody see them now? Oh, good. Great. Yeah, so please do communicate with the chat. I'm going to try and keep an eye on that. So here's the agenda for the rest of the, oh, are we still the poll? Let's see. Let me know when we're ready to move on from the poll to the next slide. Okay, so here's the agenda for the rest of the meeting. We'll be providing an overview of building electrification and its benefits, sort of an electrification 101 to do some level setting before moving on to the strategy of how we can electrify Berkeley buildings. We know some people here are intimately familiar with the ins and outs of electrification, and based on the feedback we've gotten, some people are not. So we want to be sure that everybody has access to similar information. And then we'll have some breakout groups and we'll discuss next steps. The Q&A will take place at the end of the presentation, with questions in the chat. And then just so you know, in the breakout groups, we'll be taking copious documentation of your feedback and feedback of the chat, and that will inform our next iteration of the strategy. And Katie will talk a little bit more about that. But in the meantime, I want to introduce Amy Kaiser, who co-chairs the Berkeley Climate Action Coalition's Electrification Working Group. And she's done an amazing job doing electrification education in our community. And she's going to walk us through the primer on building electrification. So thanks so much, Amy.
Thank you, Billy. All right, so I'm gonna get you oriented to electrification and its basics. To start, we want to provide a brief overview of building electrification and why it's important. Building electrification means switching the power source of our buildings from natural gas and electric to all electric. That means switching out your gas-powered appliances for modern, efficient, high-performing all-electric appliances. Another word for electrification is decarbonization, because by switching from natural gas to clean electricity from solar and wind, we're getting carbon, a greenhouse gas emission, out of our buildings. This picture shows all the appliances that can be switched from fossil fuels to clean electricity. While this graphic is of a home, it could also be a church, a restaurant, an apartment building. When we think about electrifying everything, it's not just our building appliances, but it's also transportation. Cars, buses, scooters, or my electric bike that I love so much. In our all-electric future, we power our buildings with clean, renewable energy. Already, EBCE, our local community choice energy provider, offers electricity service that's greener and cheaper than PG&E's, and an option to opt up to 100% renewable electricity service powered from California solar and wind. And you can change your electricity service plan at any time. I recently did this upgrade to the 100% and I loved it. It's so easy. The state has a goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2045. So every year, California utilities have to increase the amount of renewable energy in their power mix. So every year, the electricity on the grid gets cleaner and cleaner. By switching from gas to electricity, we're switching from a dirty, polluting fuel to a clean one that will continue to get closer to emissions-free. So when we're talking about building electrification, we're usually talking about switching out these four main gas-powered appliances. You have your gas furnaces and HVAC systems that can be replaced with highly efficient airspace heat pumps, which provide both heating and cooling. It's an all-in-one. Our gas water heaters can be replaced with electric heat pump water heaters. Gas stoves can be replaced with induction ranges and cooktops. And no, we are not talking about the old coil electric stoves, which are very inefficient and really unpleasant to cook on. Induction uses magnets to heat the cookware, which in turn heats the food or water. And it's way quicker than gas flames or electric coils. Induction cooktops and ranges are safer, you have more control, and they're extremely easy to clean. Any pot and pan that you have that like a refrigerator magnet can stick to it works with an induction cooktop. Gas clothes dryers can be replaced with efficient heat pump dryers. And besides these four, every gas appliance that you can think of, from including fireplaces or your barbecues, have efficient electric alternatives. So why do we want to electrify buildings? Because there are many benefits to electrification, including benefits to climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improved health and comfort, equity benefits, long-term cost savings, greater resilience and safety, and good quality high road green jobs. And so the next few slides, I'm going to go into each of these benefits a little bit more. So buildings are the biggest polluters after cars and transportation. As electricity from the grid gets cleaner, moving to 100% carbon-free by 2045, emissions from all electric buildings will eventually disappear. All electric buildings that have rooftop solar or purchase 100% renewable electricity, like I did, are already zero emission. The production, transport, and distribution of natural gas emits methane, a powerful greenhouse gas that's 86 times stronger than carbon dioxide. And this gas infrastructure is leaking all over. We know that climate change affects communities of color first and worst, and that tackling climate change is especially important. When natural gas is burned, it releases dangerous air pollutants, including carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, and nitrogen oxides, which uses NOx for shorthand. Nitrogen oxides are the precursor to smog, and it's dangerous for our health. This graph shows that our homes and buildings actually emit more NOx than even power plants do. Burning gas in household appliances produces harmful indoor air pollution that can increase the risk of and exacerbate asthma and other respiratory problems. Without proper ventilation, emissions from gas appliances such as carbon monoxide can even be deadly. Studies show that air quality in a home with gas appliances, like your gas stove, can be much worse than outside, exceeding even the toxin levels allowed by the EPA outdoors. Studies have shown that children in home with gas stoves have a 42% higher chance of developing asthma symptoms. And we know that the health impacts of climate change affect Black and Brown communities the most. It's those same communities that are most affected by asthma hospitalizations in Berkeley, especially children of color. By finding a way to equitably remove natural gas from our homes, electrification can make a difference in these health outcomes. All right, so induction cooking is safer for children and cooks alike. As you see in this image, like only the cookware gets hot and not the surface of the stove or the surrounding surfaces. If you were to try this experiment on an electric resistance or gas cooktop, you'd have quite a sticky mess to clean up. With climate change, we'll experience more extreme heat, and lower income residents are more likely to live in substandard housing that is poorly insulated. Many Berkeley homes and buildings don't have air conditioning, but when natural gas heaters are replaced with heat pumps, a heat pump gives you both heating and cooling, providing comfort on hot days. Plus, these systems can provide clean ventilation during smoke events. So if it's hot and smoky, with a heat pump, you are incredibly comfortable inside. This picture of the Bay Bridge is from September 9th, when the sky turned orange and dark from wildfire smoke. It was a day that felt apocalyptic to many, but it's a reminder that climate change will have many impacts on us, and we need to act fast to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prepare our homes, buildings, and communities for the impacts of climate change. Electrification can have cost savings in the long run. When you pair it with solar power, the savings really add up. Right now, gas is cheaper than electricity, but that's not going to last for very long at all. Because as more buildings electrify, there'll be fewer customers to pay for the gas infrastructure, which is to say the power plants and the gas lines. And so the power of gas is going to rise significantly. Lower income customers and renters are likely to be the last to electrify. And it could be that they get burdened with higher gas prices. And that's why it's really important that we make sure that we find a way to make electrification accessible and affordable for everyone, and not just transition those who can afford it, leaving others behind to pay more and not get the benefits. Another benefit of removing natural gas is increased resiliency and safety. Natural gas is highly flammable and can lead to devastating explosions like what we saw in San Bruno, and potentially in our homes too. And I can attest to this personally because a couple of years ago, my neighbor's leaky gas water heater exploded and burned down our house and nearly took mine with it. In the event of a major disaster that disrupts power, natural gas lines take much longer to bring back online than electrical lines do, which means that our community could be without power for weeks rather than days. Instead, transitioning buildings to run on electricity with solar and battery storage can provide clean, critical backup during emergencies or power shutoffs. With electrification, workers in the fossil fuel sector will lose jobs. However, there is a huge opportunity to create new high-road jobs that can support both living wages and electrification. A just transition recognizes the importance of taking care to protect those fossil fuel workers and communities, and ensuring that labor groups are at the table as we transition to clean energy. Okay, so now that you have heard electrification one-on-one, we're going to do another poll. So Andrea, please launch the second one. And this one has 2 questions, so go ahead, please scroll down to respond to both of them and submit your answers. I see a lot of you hitting that climate change impact one. But other ones are definitely growing as well. Okay, looks like a few more coming in. All right. Looks like we have a lot of single family houses, affordable housing, and multifamily. So thanks for taking that poll. We totally appreciate this feedback. So now we're going to get into strategy, and I'd like to introduce Danae Shorter, who is the Community Engagement Program Director at the Ecology Center, and she's going to tackle this next section. Danae, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. Giving it a second to get my video up. Thank you everyone for being here. We really appreciate it. A part of a really great team that's been working on this strategy and all of the work and outreach and education that's been involved with it. As you can see here, a few folks involved. Rincon, I think we have Ryan on the line, so who's been managing this project for the Rincon team. Super shout out to Ryan, he's been awesome. Again, my name is Danae with the Ecology Center. We've been the equity and engagement consultants on this project. And in addition to RMI as the technical expert on this project, in addition to receiving additional support from BEI, the Building Electrification Initiative, and of course, all of you and the rest of the community who has provided feedback, comments, questions, and all of that that has contributed to this really cool, this great work. So what I'm going to get into really briefly, of course, I encourage everyone to read the full strategy in its entirety. It's great. A ton of work went into it, and it's just a lot more detail than we have time to get in today. So I'll be covering kind of the community feedback and the equity guardrails that really frame the strategy. And then I'll pass it over to Katie, who's going to get into the draft strategy and those policies that I know everyone wants to hear more about. So as we know, talking about before we even get to the strategy, a ton of work went into like where to even start. And as Amy and Billy spoke to earlier, we know there's an ongoing housing and affordability and gentrification crisis in Berkeley. So we cannot begin to talk about existing building electrification and something of this magnitude in our community without really going back and looking at where we came from. So historically, of course, communities of color, especially within Berkeley, have been explicitly discriminated against when it comes to housing. This graphic here illustrates, present day, some of those indicators associated with those policies from a history and legacy of discriminatory housing policies, such as redlining, where low-income families of color were denied opportunities to build wealth, and which contributed to substandard housing where folks are not able and not having access to heating or proper cooling, are living in poorly insulated and just really unhealthy homes. So of course, all of this really lends itself to this strategy and ensuring that the benefits are received across the board, as well as, and especially in those marginalized communities that have been impacted. Today, communities of color are still suffering the highest rates of displacement, and the neighborhoods which have historically been redlined and experienced those impacts of discriminatory housing policies. Mostly, of course, South Berkeley, West Berkeley are still being impacted, are the most heavily impacted by gentrification, as you can see here, with extreme rental rates, poor protections for unsubsidized affordable housing, and just a ton of other things. And that kind of compounds on the disproportionate and adverse impacts, health impacts in these same communities, and all of the other things that our marginalized communities are facing. Nearly half of the African American population has left the city of Berkeley since the year 2000. So it's just very sad to hear, but was really important in leading with race in this strategy and seeing that these impacts from these practices are still being felt today by our marginalized and African-American, Black and BIPOC communities. This was something that was greatly considered in developing this strategy. Again, going back to the full strategy, reading that community engagement piece, the Ecology Center led a lot of that engagement. We were intentional. We did it early and will continue to promote and encourage the city of Berkeley to continue this outreach and engagement, especially focused and intentionally in marginalized communities. We heard a ton of great feedback that was already incorporated into the strategy. It's been rewritten, drafted multiple times because we wanted to ensure that that feedback was being utilized and was valued and is valued. Some of the feedback, as you can see here, that we've heard, of course, Upfront and low-term costs are a big concern. It doesn't matter how big of a costs are concerns, and they hit different communities differently. So that was definitely heard, understood, and incorporated and considered into the drafting of these policies. Health, safety, comfort, and resilience benefits of electrification should be accessible. So again, we're talking about accessibility for all communities and what that looks like, feels like, and how that is implemented with this strategy. More education needed, meeting people where they are. We understand that some folks, there's a bit of a spectrum on the understanding of what people understand electrification is and how it impacts them. So definitely making sure that in this process of engaging our community, that the education is accessible, and that it is culturally relevant to different communities, and that it is continuous so folks can continue to be involved. And a lot of other feedback like you see here, concerns of displacement, funding and financing options, labor and a just transition, all of those things, again, that is much more lined out in the full strategy, but we wanted to elevate here as things that we heard from the community. Community feedback, again, I've been really adamant about this feedback from the community. We highly value the time that our community, especially over this last year plus, that our marginalized communities have been facing so many compounding crises, took time because they see the importance of the climate crisis. It cannot wait. But at the same time, there are other considerations and concerns and priorities in communities. So the cost analysis, which you'll read more about or hear more about in this presentation, really lent itself and showed that there are significant costs to electrify, and any additional expenses are impacting our communities and need to be considered. And so from the community feedback, the team developed what we have called equity guardrails as a way to just ensure that the policies would only move forward and be required, of course not mandated, once they could be done so equitably. So this next slide here gets into what those equity guardrails are. Again, from the beginning, the city of Berkeley wanted to make sure that we're leading this effort. I'm saying we have been such a part of this team, that the city is leading this effort with equity in mind, and through that equity lens in every single thing that is incorporated into the strategy. So these equity guardrails really just serve as that foundation of the strategy, as a set of very minimal requirements, at the very least, that the recommended proposals must meet in order to advance this work. So you can see here the 4 equity guardrails that we have included in the strategy: access to health and safety benefits, ensuring equitable access to marginalized communities and others most impacted by climate change, making sure that those benefits are shared and especially prioritized for the communities hit first and worst by the adverse impacts of climate change. Access to economic benefits, ensuring all community members, especially again, those marginalized communities are communities most heavily impacted, have equitable access to the funding and financing mechanisms, high road jobs, opportunities, and are receiving the economic benefits of a project of this magnitude. Maximizing ease of installation, that gets back to accessibility in our community. This is a huge lift, and for every household it looks different. So making sure that the incentives and programs for the community provide meaningful support for renters, owners, and other folks to be able to provide a simple process that minimizes the burden as much as possible, and the impacts of all of this. Promoting housing affordability and anti-displacement, I just got into that. So ensuring that upgrades don't displace renters or overburden homeowners. So all of that, of course, needs to be centered. We don't want to, of course, promote anti-displacement, and need to keep that in mind in developing any new policies, whatever the case may be. I think that's it on my slides. Again, I encourage folks to read the full draft strategy to get a better understanding of the community engagement, the outreach that was done ahead of this strategy and involved in the development of this strategy. And now to get into the actual strategy, I'd like to invite another team member, Katie Van Dyke from the city of Berkeley, to walk us through the electrification strategies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danae and Amy. I'm Katie Van Dyke with the city's Office of Energy and Sustainable Development. And before I dive in, I also just wanted to echo my biggest appreciation for our amazing team. We have Ryan Gardner from Recon on the line, and Danae Shorter is just also so amazing. And Michael Gartman from RMI, we're kind of the core project team. They've just been so wonderful to work with, and we're really, really grateful to have been able to have the opportunity to do this work together. So now I'll be providing a brief overview of some of the work our team did in addition to the community outreach with Ecology Center, which ultimately resulted in our draft strategy. So I'll be providing a general overview tonight, and I do invite all of you to take a look at the full strategy, the draft strategy online for more details. So the first thing that we did was to work with the Building Electrification Institute, or BEI, to understand our existing building stock in Berkeley and the implications of how it would impact electrifying our buildings. So a key takeaway that we learned is that a majority of Berkeley's buildings are single-family homes, and an overwhelming majority, over 90%, are residential buildings. So the costing analysis we did focused on residential homes because of this reason, and because focusing here also has important community benefits. So we also found during this work that our building stock is older, as many of you may know. As seen in this graph, most were built in the early 1900s to 1950s. And so this means that they also have a high incidence of things like knob and tube, asbestos, poor envelope insulation and sealing, and leaky HVAC ducts. So this means that it will be more complicated to electrify them. The team also conducted a cost analysis. So RMI led this work using a mapping model that showed the costs of energy for approximately 36,000 low-rise residential homes. We then analyzed how much it would cost to electrify those homes using different modeling scenarios. Some of the key takeaways from this work were that, one, rooftop solar can improve the financial payback under current conditions for some, but we also know that there are some equity considerations that need to be addressed. Envelope improvements like insulation and air sealing are really important and provide comfort and resilience benefits, but they did not always pencil out financially. We found that there were longer paybacks for electrification in multifamily buildings, and we also saw some equity implications in the costing. For example, there were longer paybacks in some of our historically disadvantaged areas of the city. Some of the information which informed the cost model is the approximate cost of electrifying the main appliances in homes. So these costs can vary widely depending on the building, the equipment purchased, and existing conditions. For example, small apartments can actually do better on the cost. The numbers here are just intended to provide a snapshot sense of scale under current conditions. So here, the middle column shows approximate total costs of these equipment items, and the right column shows the incremental or additional cost of electric equipment over gas currently. And please note that these do include labor, but they don't include any extra costs that may be incurred, like a new panel or electrical rewiring or utility infrastructure upgrades. So a few takeaways from this is that this can be expensive, but for some, it might not be completely out of reach. Another thing we learned is that air conditioning can make airspace heat pumps a better deal, as it would cost more to install a separate furnace and an air conditioner. And although air conditioning may seem not very necessary in Berkeley today, but we know that the climate's warming, and market modeling suggests that 30 to 50% of homes will have air conditioning by 2050. And finally, even with supportive incentives, we need more financing programs in order to scale. This next slide shows the modeled bill impacts of installing electrical equipment. We know that the transition can't scale unless there are bankable savings. Basically, based on current technology prices and utility rates in Berkeley, returns are currently a mixed bag. Some appliances, such as heat pumps, can provide bill savings, but others may increase utility bills. Further, because electricity is now going towards time of use rates, where using electricity between 4 to 9 p.m. will be peak or more expensive, these rates will have a big impact on people's bills, and there may be uncertainty on returns depending on when people are using these appliances moving forward. So the cost modeling that was done by our team, as we saw, showed that electrification in Berkeley under current market conditions with our mild climate can be expensive. And we're going to need to work collectively to find ways to both reduce these costs and develop more affordable and accessible financing and funding options as soon as possible so that we can bring electrification to scale. However, the modeling did show that there are currently some opportunities that can pencil out financially today. These include when someone's purchasing or refinancing a home, generally when replacing equipment near its end of life, when someone's already planning to install air conditioning, and when someone is investing in distributed energy resource projects like rooftop solar or storage batteries or electric vehicles, although there are some equity considerations here too. So when looking at these costs, it's important to remember some things. First, there are several non-monetary benefits that are not included in these numbers, such as health, comfort, safety, resilience, and avoided climate impacts. Also, this market is evolving very fast, and there may be opportunities to reduce these costs and adjust the timeline with the shifting of external programs, technology, financing programs, and high-quality jobs. And now I'm going to walk you through the draft strategy, which was developed as a result of all of this work that we did together. So this graphic represents a visual summary of our proposed electrification strategy. There are 4 primary strategies being proposed by the team for the city to advance electrification. You can see these on the top of this building. They are time of replacement and renovation, time of sale, building performance standards, and neighborhood electrification and gas pruning. And we're going to dive into these a little more in the next slide. As you can see, the strategies are being held up by 3 pillars that we feel will be needed for all of the strategies to be successful. The first is education on electrification technologies, the benefits, the programs, the policies, and this needs to be done for everyone involved, including the community, contractors, workers, labor unions, and funding and financial institutions, and many others. The second pillar is accessible funding and financing, which we know is going to be necessary to scale so that everyone can afford to do this. The third pillar is regulatory changes. And so we also know that there's going to need to be some changes to existing local, state, and federal regulations and policies to enable these strategies to be scalable. This will require regional action and a shift in the status quo. And it's worth noting that the pillars are things that the city can support and work to advance, but in many cases will require efforts beyond the city itself. Finally, at the foundation of this structure are the equity guardrails that Danae so beautifully described earlier. And these are really intended, as she said, to ensure that each of the strategies is built on just and thoughtful grounding. And this means that before any of the strategies at the top can be implemented, they must meet or exceed the equity guardrails. So next, we're going to dive into the 4 primary strategies in more detail. Under current regulatory and technological conditions, no single pathway will be enough to achieve the city's carbon neutral goals, and each of these pathways should be pursued. I'm going to provide some more information on each of these next, and in the report, we provided even more detail, including specific program and policy actions for each strategy that you can find. So the first strategy addresses electrifying when equipment is being replaced at its end of life and at point of major renovation. And while renovation can be a good opportunity to electrify for cost and convenience purposes, it introduces some challenges by being piecemeal and doesn't allow for full system redesign efficiencies. Point of replacement also introduces challenges with timing. For example, if your water heater goes out, you're going to want to replace it right away versus waiting the time it may take to install the wiring needed for an electric heat pump water heater and any other potential upgrades, such as a panel upgrade. The time of sale strategy touches all buildings that are bought and sold and would require either the seller or potentially new buyer to make upgrades to the home. It builds on Berkeley's Building Emissions Savings Ordinance, or BESO, which already requires buildings that are sold to disclose an energy score and list out potential electrification upgrades. BESO was recently amended to include mandatory upgrades at time of sale, and the city will be working to define when and what those requirements will be. The building performance standard strategy would require buildings to meet minimum standards. An example of a building standard might be requiring buildings over a certain square footage to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to a certain level by a certain date. This strategy also builds on BESO's requirement for larger buildings. And finally, the fourth strategy looks at simultaneously removing natural gas infrastructure to a given neighborhood or set of buildings and electrifying those buildings. We know that gas infrastructure poses a threat to our health and safety, and if we just electrify homes here and there, the utility still needs to continue serving that entire neighborhood. If, however, we can find a way to strategically decommission the gas infrastructure on the neighborhood scale, this could provide efficiencies of scale, as well as a clear and strategic approach, sending a market signal, and it can also avoid stranded assets. This is a solution that's also of interest to labor groups to advance high quality jobs. So in addition to the 4 policy areas, The report details actions to advance the 3 supporting pillars of education, accessible funding and financing, and regulatory changes, as well as the equity guardrails. Some are listed here, and you can see more details within the report. And finally, let's take a look at the time frame to electrify all of Berkeley's buildings. So given the potential cost implications of electrification that we found in the cost modeling, and as a direct result of the feedback we heard from the community who had a lot of concerns around the cost, the team developed a phased approach to this strategy. So this approach attempts to balance the urgency of the climate crisis by moving as quickly as we can on some things that can pass the equity guardrails in the short term, while taking some time to do additional work to ensure that any electrification policies and programs in the longer term can pass the equity guardrails, so that this enormous task of electrifying all of our buildings can be done so equitably at scale. So phase 1, we're saying, is kind of now through about 2025, and this is really the time for us to lay the groundwork. Building up the pillars, doing some pilot projects, building relationships to advance high quality jobs. Phase 2 will start as soon as possible, but we're saying no later than 2022 to 2030. And this is when we would start implementing the core policy levers, but this can only begin when phase 1 actions have demonstrated feasibility, cost effectiveness, and sufficient accessible financing and funding mechanisms are available. Finally, phase 3, which is also as soon as possible, we're saying would be no later than 2027 through 2045. And this is when we would complete the transition. And the phases may have some overlap depending on the policy or program and when it's able to pass the equity guardrails. So some may be able to move more quickly than others. Okay, so now that you've heard a little bit more about the proposed strategy, we'd like to get a little initial feedback before we go into the breakouts. So we're going to do one more poll. This poll has 2 questions. So once again, if you could please scroll down to respond them and submit your answer. And we'll have more time to get into depth on the strategy during the Q&A section at the end. Okay, it looks like we have an overwhelming, actually, sorry. Okay, great. I think some folks are starting to take the poll now. Thank you for your feedback. Maybe we'll just give it maybe 30 more seconds if folks can complete the poll, and then we can share the results. Okay, so if someone's able to share the results, maybe. I know we didn't, I think, get a chance maybe for everyone to respond, but we'll have more time to discuss this in the breakout. So it looks like for the electrification strategies, time of replacement seems to have gotten the most votes. And in terms of what the city should prioritize, kind of accessible multifamily financing programs, I think was ahead. So great, thank you so much for this. Okay, great. And so I think next up is our discussion in breakout rooms. So if we could go to the next slide. Great. So shortly, you all will be placed into a breakout room for, I think, 20 minutes. And then we'll be coming back to the main room for the last part of the presentation and then Q&A. So these are the 3 questions that we'll be exploring with our groups. The first is, what excites you about electrification and what are your concerns? The second is, given Berkeley's commitment to become a fossil fuel-free city, what would it take for you to switch off natural gas appliances in your home, business, community organization, place of worship, any building? And then the third question is, what additional information about electrification would be helpful and what can the city do to support further understanding of this topic? So these are the questions. And then the format of how we're going to do this, because there are going to be several of us in each group, is that when we go into our breakout groups, you will have a facilitator. People can do some brief intros in the chat, and your facilitator will be providing a link to a Google document, and then everyone should click on that link and head to that document. And once there, we'll take a few minutes to answer the first question. To answer, we're going to be doing this by typing your answers. So you can click on a square, which is our our little virtual sticky notes, and you can anonymously type a response. And we ask that you please try not to type on a square that's highlighted so that you don't accidentally write over someone else's response. So we'll take a few minutes to write our answers and then another few minutes to discuss together. And during that time, you'll see on the bottom right corner, there's a green star and a yellow question mark. So when we're doing our discussions, if you see a response that someone else wrote that you like, you can click on that green square and drag it to that sticky note. And if you have a question, you can click on the yellow question mark and drag it to a sticky note that you have a question on. And we'll take some time to kind of answer some questions and talk a little further about that. On the left side of the document, you'll be able to see that there are several pages of sticky notes per question in case you run out of room. And then your facilitator will let you know when to scroll to the next question, and each question has a distinct kind of sticky color. So you can move on to the next color when your group's ready. Okay, so if you have any more questions, you can ask your facilitator. And Andrea, if you could send us to our breakout rooms, that would be great. Thank you all so much. We'll see you soon. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for participating in the breakout rooms. I know we had a great group that had a great discussion. And we have just a few minutes more of the formal presentation before going into the Q&A. So we're going to start with next steps. So the first next step is that we would love for you to please share your feedback on the draft strategy. You can do so by going to the link on the webpage here, where you can find the full draft strategy, as well as a link to an online form to provide comments. And so we'll be providing this link after the presentation, and we will be accepting comments for about 2 more weeks through May 15th. And after receiving public comments, we plan to complete writing the report by the summer, and then bringing it to council in the fall. And then finally, this is really intended to be part of an ongoing conversation. We would love to continue engaging with you, both as we finalize the report, as well as when we move into implementation. And to help us learn more, we have a few resources to share. And I'm going to be passing it back to Amy Kaiser again.
Hello, everybody again. I wanted to tell you about this event that I am coordinating, and that I'm putting it on with some of the same folks that are working on this event tonight. Partnering with Rebecca Milliken has been a great help from the city of Berkeley, and also Danae and the folks at the Ecology Center are going to be helping to produce this. But anyway, a lot of what we're talking about today may seem new to you, or perhaps you've heard of electrification but don't know anyone who's taken the steps to get natural gas out of their home. And if you are interested to see what this transition to all electric looks like on the ground, I want to invite you to attend the East Bay Green Home Tour, an event that grew out of the Berkeley Electrification Working Group that I co-chair. And this takes place over the first 2 Sundays in June. It's a free virtual tour on Zoom of 12 homes in the East Bay that are all electric or are well on their way to being all electric. Berkeley's housing stock is well represented in this tour. Most of these homes were built with gas plumbing, but we also have a couple of all electric new constructions, including a super cute ADU and a large multifamily condo development in West Oakland that's all electric. And for each home site, you'll view a video tour of the house, followed by a live Q&A with the homeowner or tenant. And also, we've slotted in some 20-minute talks with experts on air quality and electric heating systems, plus an induction cooking demonstration, and an energy advisor from Bayren who will fill you in on rebates and free services. So register today at the link. Is the link up there? Yeah, eastbaygreenhome.com. And again, it's free, it's virtual, and it's just a few hours on 2 consecutive Sundays. So these are some resources that are really great and that I recommend these to people all the time. And I think that we'll be dropping links to these in the chat. So BayREN offers technical advice, resources, rebates, and incentives for homeowners, business owners, and multifamily and commercial buildings. BayREN has not only rebates, but they have these energy advisors that it's a free service. It's a terrific place to start, or even just a call to try to game out how this might work in your own home. And the Switches On is a great consumer resource. It's statewide. It may be more than state, but anyway, it's got just an amazing amount of information and resources there. And at the Berkeley Tool Lending Library, you can borrow an Induction cooktop and Induction cookware, bring it home and see the difference for yourself. I know that some of the people in my breakout room that I facilitated are on the list to borrow the Induction cooktop. So it's a great way to start trying it out. And also East Bay Community Energy has made a short video of a local chef cooking shakshuka on an induction burner. I'm sorry, it's not a burner, it's called a hob, an induction hob. And so I think that you will start to notice, even if you don't go looking for it, you're going to start to notice just a lot more conversation around induction cooking. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And what we're going to do to end this event is to open it up to you all. And thanks so much to our volunteer electrification ambassadors who have joined us tonight. And on the line to ask any questions that you might have or try to. We have 4 members of the Berkeley Climate Action Coalition's Electrification Working Group, which are Tom Grayley, Eric Ahrens, Kate Ledger, and Susie Marzola. And we're also fortunate to have Matt Goff from the Sierra Club as well. And Katie Van Dyke from the city is still on the line also. And so if you want to take a deeper dive into the strategy, this is a good time to ask your questions. So were we going to do this, Rebecca, were we going to do this in chat tonight?
Hey, yeah, so the way I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Hi, everyone that's still with us. It looks like we still have a large crowd. If you can drop your questions into the chat, I am going to attempt to kind of consolidate them, and I will read them out loud. And then I'm going to ask our ambassadors to respond. So just give me a moment to find where these started. Okay. I'm waiting for the chats to come in. Okay. So first question I can actually answer, we've got one about the East Bay Green Home Tour. They're actually on Sundays. And the question is it about the same houses or different houses? So 6 of the houses will be featured one Sunday, 6 will be featured the second Sunday. And then Amy's got great folks interspersed, doing an induction cooking demo. She's got folks there to talk about the rebates available and more things. If you can't tune in for all of it, that's fine. Amy has a great website and she's going to be hosting the recordings, the videos there. She won't be able to do the full recordings, but the videos. All right. Let's see. Other questions that we had. Okay. So one of our residents, this person already has solar on their garage, which fully supports their house, and a Chevy Bolt, which is great. They still have a gas hot water dryer and a furnace, and they want to replace this using the existing ductwork, which was recently installed. But the technology feels kind of intimidating. So it says it would be easier for conversions within a neighborhood. I guess it wasn't a question, it was more of a statement. So the non-technical people will be supported. But I'm wondering if one of our ambassadors can speak to if you are feeling overwhelmed by all this technology, where can you get resources? Who can you talk to help you through that process? So maybe, is that Tom? Are you smiling there?
Okay.
Great,
Yeah.
go for it, Tom.
Hi. So there are multiple resources. I recommend BayRen is an extremely good resource. You can land up talking to one of their, and I think they call them energy advisors. I'm not sure the official title, but either a telephone call or an email into one of them. The BayRen, it can go in through their website. And these people are fairly knowledgeable, and they're particularly knowledgeable about the rebates. But they will also send you to various contractors. People like myself are also available. We're great believers in electrification, and we can tell you about our experience. Kate, Eric, Amy, and even Rebecca has all been through all of this in many ways. So we're available. And but from an official point of view, I'd first recommend going to BayRen.
Thanks, Tom. So this one, Matt, I'm wondering if you can answer. So Matt does work on this is statewide, right, Matt, for the Sierra Club. And there are folks wanting to know, it says many cities need to ban gas in new buildings. Has actually, this is probably actually for Billy or Sarah, who's on the line. Has Berkeley cleared the legal challenge yet? So maybe, Matt, you could speak to other cities, but in new buildings, there are no legal challenges for Berkeley. And if any of the staff want to pipe in about that. But Matt, maybe you could just talk a little bit about what's happening statewide with other cities.
Sure, yeah. This is a great question. So right now there are either 43 or 44 cities in California that have adopted building electrification policies. And in the last year or so, we've really seen the trend shift from going to electric preferred building electrifications to all electric building electrification ordinances or gas bans. So for example, Oakland now has an all electric building electrification ordinance. San Francisco has an all electric building electrification ordinance. San Jose does as well. And we're seeing this movement grow. So down in Southern California, the city of Riverside actually voted a week and a half ago to direct their staff to develop an all-electric ordinance for new construction. So I think this question about the legality is valid, but I also think that city lawyers across California have looked at this issue, and they've all found that building electrification is well within a city's legal authority. And so that's why we're continuing to see adoption of these all electric ordinances across the state. And maybe I'll pass it back to someone from the city if they want to talk specifically about that.
And I think
Rebecca?
hang on, is one of our city staff members.
Rebecca, this is Sarah.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
Can I give just a quick? Yes. So there has been a legal challenge to Berkeley's natural gas prohibition in new construction by the California Restaurant Association. And that is in the federal court in Northern California. We do not have a resolution on that yet. The original hearing was delayed due to the pandemic. It was held, but we're still waiting for a decision from the judge. But in the meantime, we're still implementing. It went into place January 1st, 2020.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And Eric, it looks like you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just like to add something. There was in the question, part of it was, can one use the existing air ducts in the house? And I could speak to that, to the person who asked that, because I use the existing air ducts in my house when I changed to a heat pump, and a neighbor of mine did that also. So I can, a lot of contractors don't want to use the existing air ducts because it's just, it's a standard way of doing things, doing everything. But two of us have used existing air ducts, and I'd be happy to talk about them more.
Thanks, Eric.
I also use existing air ducts.
Tom did, and I also just installed a heat pump using my using the existing vents. We wanted to replace our ducts because rats had gotten in them. But we've got, and someone is asking to please put the BayRen Home Plus link. If you could put that into the chat, that's for Jan. I'm also going to send this out to everyone who registered. So this is this resource that Tom mentioned. Here's another one for our electrification ambassadors. Question is, this is from Chris. How do I look for an electrical inspector to tell me what has to be upgraded to prepare a house to plug in electric replacements when those appliances wear out? So one of our ambassadors.
I'll take a first crack at that. You need to find an electrician, not an electrical inspector. And so and this is actually a real problem in terms of finding electricians willing and able to do the complete work that would be necessary. Finding people willing to do knob and tube is a replacement is very traumatic. I've got 4 friends of mine who are trying to get their knob and tube replaced, and we're struggling to find contractors willing to do the work. But in terms of analyzing your home, I'd just get a reputable electrician, and they would be able to come in and tell you what would be required for your home.
Thanks, Tom. I'm just looking at, so a few people have mentioned that they've used BayRen and that it's still, it's challenging. They get contractors, but they still have to call them and get bids. And you do, we know that we always at the city recommend that you at least get 3 bids for any work you're going to undertake. There are contractors that will do all of this work, or you can choose to do, separate ones. And it's finding someone who can help kind of educate you on what goes first. Here's a real practical question. For those of you who have heat pumps, how loud are the heat pumps? Are they for the whole house or room by room? And I can answer this, but I'm gonna let our ambassadors tell us. How loud are those heat pumps?
They're loud. It depends. I mean, there's different ones, but the ones that the heat pump water heater that I have, which is in our basement, is there is sound associated with it. So I would check the rating for the equipment and ask about sound if this has to go into a space that is in the living zone, but they can definitely be loud.
But I think Eric has the perfect solution for heat pump water heaters. Right, Eric?
Yeah, well, I do. It costs more though. It's a Sandon heat pump hot water heater, and it has and it has the compressor outside, just like the air heat pumps, and then the hot water tank is inside, so the sound is outside, but the Sandon thing hardly makes any noise at all. I mean, you can stand next to it and you can barely hear it. So it uses carbon dioxide also, which is interesting, as the refrigerant instead of one of these fluorocarbon compounds, which are very heat trapping, for keeping in the heat in the earth and the global warming. Carbon dioxide is much better, and so Sandon has the 2 good features. You've got the compressor that makes the sound outside the house, and there's hardly any sound, and it uses carbon dioxide, but the whole thing does cost more. So I did this all kind of as an experiment.
Great. I think Kate, you wanted to add something to that. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, I agree with everything you say. Sometimes it's actually can be cheaper to install the Sandon because it will you'll save money on not having to vent it, and it has a much lower power draw than the hybrid hot water heaters. So you may not have to upgrade your electrical panel. So it's maybe worth looking into. But I did want to get back to the issue of sound and say that I did a mini split on a property, And we ended up having to put the compressor, the outdoor unit, right next to the front door, and you can't hear it. It's really very, very, once, if it's outside, it's just, it's, the small mini splits are, you don't hear them. They go into background noise.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Kate. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
my HVAC unit is actually on my roof, and the only thing I hear is it starting up. And that, other than that, and you have to be like right underneath the room that it's under in order to hear that. But that's it.
Yeah, and I can just say we have the heat pump for our HVAC is right outside a window, and I asked a neighbor about it, because she lives close to it. You cannot hear it at all. I cranked it all the way up. It is silent. In fact, I have to check that it's on. And the only way I know that it's on is that there's this nice fresh air circulating in the house. My house used to always smell stale because the air exchanger is running and getting fresh air in all the time. So that's great. But the water heater, the heat pump water heater, I don't have this sand in. It is loud, and ours is in our garage. It's partly why we don't run it at night. But you can decide when it runs really easily, unlike your gas tank. I'm going to scan through the questions here, and thanks that some people are responding to them by chat, which is great. There are some concerns about EMFs. We're talking about using electric appliances, and people are, wondering about the safety of that. And I know that's come up with induction cooking, especially. And I'm wondering if any of our ambassadors want to address the EMF issue. And Kate is raising a hand, so go for it, Kate.
Yeah, this is something that I was very curious about myself, and tested my own stove. I have an electric resistant stove, and found that it dropped off to background when I was using the burners at, I think it was a foot, or maybe it was 18 inches when I had it on high. So when I mean dropped off to background, that the EMF field from the burner, it drops off very fast, and it dropped off to whatever was background by, I think it was 18 or 16, 18 inches at the most. What's interesting is that when the fan is on in the oven, to keep the electronics cool, so the oven turns on and then his fan comes on, and the fan was far more significant in terms of generating an EMF field. And I talked to Tom Lent, who has an induction stove, and he's been doing some monitoring on his stove, and his stove is actually has a better EMF field than mine. So he can, it drops off to background more like 18 inches or less. I think he was on the thing. He may respond in the chat. And I did have another friend that did, I tested. Yeah.
We are just coming on time, so I want to respect people's time. I don't know, Kate, if you're able to stay.
I'm done. After
the meeting. But really great information. I see Deborah Moore put a report in from RMI on this issue also. So I want to thank everybody so much for attending this meeting and giving so much great feedback, and to all the presenters and facilitators, really our deep, deep appreciation. And please, go, if you check the website, we'll have places to put, the survey is up there, and the report is up there, and we'll put these slides and the presentation up there also. And for questions, there's both Katie and Danae's information. I want to say that both these women are amazing and have really put a lot of heart and soul into this project. And we appreciate everyone's time and attention. And I want to give a special appreciation to people who helped me with technical information in the chat. It's a wonderful community of highly motivated people in Berkeley. And it's just so exciting to think about what kind of progress we can make together. So I'll stay on for a little bit if people have some specific questions or, but otherwise, everybody want to thank you so much and respect your time and wish you all a good night. Thank you. And thanks, to Katie especially.
I just wanted to make mention of one thing that the electrification group and Amy has worked on is that, and something that came up in the groups that the group that I was in, the chat group, was who are the resources? Who are the electricians? And Amy has reminded that on the Green Tour website, there is a resources menu tab that has some names of contractors, electricians, that kind of thing. Amy, is that what's there?
Yeah, you know what? It doesn't have electricians, but it has some like heat pump installers that the group recommends.
Mhm.
It needs to be updated, but there's definitely, it's a good place to start. That's eastbaygreenhome.com, and on the resource page, there's the electrification working group. You click on that and it'll take you to the fact sheets that we put together.
Thank you.
Well, I'm hesitant to close out the meeting. We still have 50 people on. So people are obviously motivated and interested.
Well, this is like a regular meeting where people get together and they hang around afterwards. And that's a good part of the meeting often, is after the meeting. And so if you can hang on, you can have a good part after the meeting right now.
Could I ask something?
Sure.
Can you hear me? I guess you can hear me.
Yes.
I didn't get an answer to my questions very much. One of them was, are you going to be highly recommending or even requiring that people replace their knob and tube before they get any electrical appliances?
You know, that's really a question. That level of detail is really specific. I answered that in the chat, specific to the building and the building codes and a licensed electrician. We can't really, you know, give that. We're not ready to give that level of information.
Sure. Okay. I'm sorry I didn't see it in the chat.
No problem.
For answering. Did somebody also answer the question about whether the ADA legal implications have been considered at all with this plan?
No, that one didn't. I remember seeing that one. Let me see if I can read it. It was up here. It's
you
great.
know, I saw it, and
Okay.
to my knowledge, we hadn't considered it, but that is exactly the kind of information, you know, that, since that's part of what this meeting was about, hearing what people's concerns are so that we can take them under consideration. So I appreciate that.
Good. Thank you. That's really important for all the people. There are a growing number of people in Berkeley who have electrical sensitivity, and as the 5G rollout accelerates, there will be more, I can guarantee you. So the people who cannot tolerate electricity are going to find this a very, very difficult plan to live with, and they'll probably have to leave their homes. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us and to everybody. I mean, this is exactly the reason why we have meetings and want to hear from all different people. And we did hear a lot of different ideas and opinions tonight. And I think it's time to let everybody go on with their evenings. And so again, I just want to really thank all the staff and everybody who's assisted us so far on the report, and for everyone's dedication towards the planet. Good night, everyone.